Okay, thank you for the introduction and thank you for still being here after 2 days. I didn't know if it was an honor or if it was a burden to speak at this point. So I was thinking we could try and do this a little bit together at some point, because I want to stay quite close to the question that Beatrix put into the space about size, and I want to answer it from a kind of historical and somewhat technical perspective, but maybe we can eventually do it a little bit together, then it will become more fun. Yeah? So I don't know if that's what you invited me for, but like I actually think that size is absolutely a question of size, a question of quantity, a question of scale, is absolutely foundational to even the existence of museums. Like museums are the answer to a problem of size, and I'll try to explain that. But before that, I try to go through that with you. I want to say, like in terms of what Sissy was saying yesterday, in terms of unlearning, I've realized that like my perspective on museums and institutions, or the one, let's say, I adhere to, is a different one than the one of art history, which is the more dominant and common one. So let me just, as kind of briefly say, like, what are these two perspectives, and ask you to just leave the art historical one to the side. So the art historical one, the one we know, basically understands museums as places, as a repository for art objects, which are important kind of treasures of cultural heritage, and that classifies them. Yeah? The other perspective, which is a more anthropological or sociological perspective, sees museums as civilizing rituals for citizens in democracies. Yeah? So this perspective is shared by like a number of people, museum studies, people like Tony Bennett or Carol Duncan. Like Carol Duncan's book is called Civilizing Rituals, or Museum Bodies, which is by another writer called Helen Rees-Leahy. So their view of museums can maybe be, in a quick way, described by a kind of caricature, which is, I don't know exactly from when, because I'm not an academic, so I don't need to know the dates of some things, but I'd say like 200 years ago, at the beginning of museums. And so in this caricature, you see a mob. You see like kind of a mob of people on the street, and they're kind of all over each other, maybe 30, 40 people. They're kind of drunk, and the men are kind of all over the women, groping. It's like kind of a Dionysiac mess. No? And in the second image of the caricature, you see the same set of people inside the building, which is a museum, nicely divided into couples and individuals, and very civilized, looking at the paintings and the sculptures. So to say like this other perspective is more, like the museum is like an institution which works on the conduct, the behavior of people. It was a place where people could learn, like people of lower class could learn the conduct, behavioral patterns of people of upper class by also being in close distance to them. Okay, but that's not the topic. I mean, you can interrupt me at any moment, because if you know my work, I like the dialogical, so I'm happy if something is not clear or something. So, but to come back to size, just to say that this is the more perspective I'm looking at museums and institutions. So the basic premise, from which my little talk takes its point of departure, is that like every society, no matter what size, no matter what culture, every human society needs rituals where the society gathers and kind of celebrates and reflects and reenacts its own kind of values and foundational categories. Yeah? Should I say that again? Like, huh? Should I? Yeah. So every society every society which has ever existed, no matter its size, needs ritual gatherings where this society can gather, and in this celebration or ritual, it reenacts, it reflects its own foundational categories and its values. Yeah? So to make this more, and I'll try and give like a very broad run through history. How can this be done? So maybe now we can look at my YouTube clip that I was looking for yesterday to try and make this more entertaining at this time. Okay, now I'll ask you to comment on this a little bit, yeah? I don't know why on YouTube they made it in slow motion. The music is in real time, but now it's real time again. See the people with the drums there? Switch it up. Okay, so that's a Sabar ritual, which you can find in Senegal and Gambia. It's a traditional thing. I was trying to find one where they scan the whole, to do a 360 degree with, but I couldn't find one. So basically the way it works is that there's like people gathered in a kind of rectangle or a big circle, sitting around. Then at one end there's the men playing the sabar drum, maybe 6, 7 men playing the... Yeah? Well, I think yes. Like if you, I mean, this was one which I did a long YouTube search yesterday. It's more difficult to find. So I wanted to find one which is in a village, because nowadays it can also be done in Dakar or whatever, you know. To help you, village worked, and but it can be much fuller than that. It can be 2-3 rows. Yeah? So how many people live in a village? I don't know, a few hundred, right? So I would say yes, like all the villagers, all the people of this community can gather, and they can come together and celebrate, yeah? In all senses of the word. So what would be the next scale up from a village? What would be the next size of community or settling? Huh? Town, yes. City. Yeah. So would it work? Would it work to do this thing for a city? No. Why not?
It's too big.
Yeah. See, so simple, right? So simple. So what's the answer? What's the answer? What is a ritual for a city?
Parade.
But think of like what are the most important ancient cities? Because we need to go through history. Huh? Yeah. I can help you on that sometimes. But I mean historically, yeah. I mean, gay helps to like what I'm thinking about. What is the ancient city? What is the huh? Athens, yeah. Okay, so where did the Athenians gather? Huh? Agora, yeah. Theater. Okay, how many people fit into the theater? Yeah, a few thousand. So we're going from very good. Like it's also what I would have answered, but so we're going from a village scale for a few hundred people who can basically sit in a circle. We're going to a scale of a few thousand, right? And how do you organize a few thousand? In a theater, yeah. And so actually in the theater, which is at the foot of the Acropolis, is actually fit 17,000 people. And so considering the fact that only aristocratic men, or the men of Athens, were considered citizens, I think Athens had about 40 or 50,000. So basically, like a relevant number, if not almost all citizens, could gather in the theater. Yeah? So, and constitute like the body politic, or the public body. Now it's also something which I'm very concerned with, is that when you go to the theater, which still exists today, you become part of the public, you know, the singular collective body, you know. And you had in ancient Athens, and you know, still in Germany today, Stadttheater, city theater, you still have this kind of the public coming together as one kind of collective body. So what's then the next step up from city? Huh?
Football.
Now, in terms of we had village, we had city. What is the next? So State. Okay, and this ties in nicely with Dave's speech. So, what is the biggest? Here we had it already. What is the biggest place of gathering that we can imagine, or like architecturally? A stadium. Okay, how many people fit into a stadium?
100,000.
Okay, yeah, like 90,000. I think Bernabeu is 90,000 or something. Yeah, 80 to 90,000. How many people are nations? Millions. Yeah. Okay, so there we are. There's a problem, right? How the fuck do you gather a nation?
You watch on television.
Huh? What? Yeah.
Newspapers.
Television, TV, but you don't gather them anymore, you know? So I think that, I mean, this opens a bigger debate, and you have a point. But we're still talking about an embodied gathering with actual presence, you know? So there's no actual, like, you could, I mean, this becomes a very big conversation for which 20 minutes, you know, is not enough. And also, I will have to do some research, but there's definitely a point to like the TV and stuff. But let's say to stay with the basic premise of a gathering, how do you gather 10 million, 20 million, 30 million nowadays, 60 or 80 million people in a European capital, like Dave said, they're like what? Yeah?
Marathon.
Huh?
A marathon.
But it's not a rich man.
You elect representative of
Yeah. But that's. No, they've already said it basically.
So after Charlie Hebdo massacre, 3 million people came into the streets of Paris,
Yeah.
Champs-Élysées, the public space, the Place de la République, no problem.
But that's an exceptional thing. Like, what is a ritualistic, regular place of gathering? Dave already said it. He said between 1825, so 1789 and 1825, every capital had a, but he said something that he said, a national museum. That's it. Like, museums are, and that's would be the thesis, now we could discuss this forever after, but that's museum studies, you know, like that would be, you know, museums are the answer that comes back, that's my answer to your question, Beatrix, to the answer to the question of size. How do you gather millions of people? So you cannot expand any more in space, because the Colosseum, I think, took 50,000, 80,000. Like, a stadium is too small. So it becomes like a spatio-temporal expansion, and that functions via opening hours. You know, like I like to say, like, opening hours, maybe next to soap, are one of the biggest achievements of Western civilization, right? And so you can say that basically in terms of gathering, there's two basic modalities. One is appointment. Most things that we know in history of humankind, ritual gatherings happen by appointment, you know? So you come to the theater at 7, or you come to the church Sundays at 11. You go to the football stadium Saturdays at 3. Yeah? So these are appointments. And then you have on the other side newer forms, which are basically the museum or the gallery, the shopping mall, which function via opening hours. And by the sheer fact of being open from 10 to 6, they can have a throughput of many more people. So millions of French people will have gone to the Louvre. Not at the same time. So that's the price. You don't have this energetic cohesion, but at least they went to the same place. Yeah? So that was the trick. Yeah? And when we walk through the doors of the Louvre, we are the sovereign, we are the French citizen.
Yeah, just add one more space.
Yeah.
That's Mecca.
Yeah, but
That's a ritual that brings people millions.
Yeah.
Control.
Yeah.
Cosmic timetable.
It's cosmic. Okay.
Yeah, timetables.
Yeah, I'll think about that longer. But I think I understood Beatrix's question also very much in relation to where we are now with museums expanding. So, where were we before we arrived in Mecca? So then the thing is that so museums, and now comes the real kind of circus trick of this new ritual museum, is that not only can it accommodate more people, and instead of thousands, millions over the course of time, obviously, it needs time to do that, but also it can address them individually. So this is a crazy feature. You can address more people and address them more individually than you could. And that's basically a clear reflection of how we understand modern democracies. More people gather in a nation, but the individual, the rights of the individual are cherished. So that's why, in my thinking, and a few, this museum studies, people the exhibition remains, television, internet, all great, but the museum remains the central ritual of our current social and economic formation. Yeah? And that, this could be a longer discussion.
You have literally just a second ago excluded the Islamic world from the question of democracy.
No, I didn't exclude it. I'm just trying to kill my minutes. I'm happy to speak about Mecca for the rest. But there's also, let's talk about it later. But so the point is that just to make this quick, is that the temples we are building nowadays are not cinemas. They're not churches anymore, but the temples we're building are these weird places where we walk around individually and look at art objects, Sometimes there's too many of them. And, but that's still, in my opinion, the central ritual of our time. What is now the problem? So the good thing about it is, there's many people which can come into these places, sometimes they're even for free. But another weird figure is that more people go to see museums in Germany, and I think also in England, than go to see professional football. That's the power of opening hours, live.
It's the power of freedom.
No, in London, in England maybe, but
Have you been to a football match?
yeah, no, yeah, but it's the format itself. It's the format itself. Having 80,000 or 30,000 people once every 2 weeks on a Saturday afternoon is a different kind of motor, a different kind of horsepower than being open 10 to 6, 365 days a year in Dublin. That was tough. But anyway, each of these points, could be major discussions, and I hear you. But what I want to come to is that, that where we are at today, and then I'll stop, is that we have these institutions, these kind of big machines which can include a lot of people, more than any other ritual format has ever been able to do, and we can address them individually, and so that's great. And Kasper was saying this morning, when you walk into a church, you were saying you feel a little bit and because you're kind of subjected to an order. When you walk into the museum, you feel you can make your own interpretation, and so that was important to, also in terms of democracy, enlightenment, Western rationality, to say there's not a dominant order which we're going to impose on you, but you can make your own interpretation. To have a weak bond, to get out of these rigidities of a fixed cosmological order, or go into a more kind of relative mode of your own interpretations. Yeah? So where you can have but the I don't know if this is going to be comprehensible, but so this is very important for Western modernity, to have this kind of weak, a bit rational, Hegelian kind of when you relate to an artwork, it's quite cerebral, it's quite distant. It's not regular that you cry in front of an artwork, While in cinema, in a music concert you might enter some kind of trance. But so that's the disadvantage. The advantage is that you are kind of a sovereign, also in the way that you kind of relate to the work. Like you're going to make your interpretation, yeah? And relate it to other things in history. But I think today, like, and it's also related a lot to, I hope this has become clear, to being an individual. Yeah? So you can walk through there, make your own individual interpretation, go on your own individual time with how you individually choose to, and for however long you might wish to. Yeah? So it's so you're roaming through there as this kind of hyper individual. There's other people around, but you don't actually meet them. So in terms of like Enlightenment and Western modernity, that's first of all a great thing, because we don't want to be stuck in these kind of unfree, rigid structures of like, religion, the family, and gender roles. So Enlightenment or Western modernity has kind of emancipated itself from all of these structures and kind of basically by acts of separation. Even the idea of the marriage is now kind of maybe the last bastion which has been undone. Even that has become flexibilized. Yeah? So, but like nowadays in 2017, I think the question of home re-arises. Like we've become so emancipated, so free, so individualized that we ask ourselves, okay, but where's there a sense of belonging which is maybe not rigid? And I think to me, that's today the question, that like we have to stay with museums. And I think museums have to become, in some weird way, they can't become smaller because society is getting larger. So if a society of millions can somehow go through a museum slowly, what about a global society? Where does a global society gather? That becomes really, really difficult to think about. Yeah? So in some senses, like, we have to find even bigger institutions, and at the same time, this element of being individualized is also is becoming a problem. Yeah? So like at the same time, we have to find ways of producing temporary communities, non-rigid communal moments in these highly open and individualized formats of the exhibition. Yeah? So to still bring people together at the same time without forcing them into a kind of collective body, which would be like in a theater where you, like, even if you can theoretically leave, you will make a big scene. While like in the museum, if you leave, it doesn't make a big thing. It was actually interesting. I was asking Anneliek, like, why are we in this space today? And she said, well, it's a test, because yesterday it was made such a scene, or I don't know how you swear it, like, it felt like a bit too pressurized when you would walk out of the space. So this space is apparently closer to a liberal sensibility, where you can walk in and out, there's more sense of freedom, while this was like too kind of old school sensibility, where you really form a too rigid community. Yeah? And so we react to these things on a level of sensibility. But there's also price. Like, for example, personally, I found it very disruptive to be up there because I couldn't focus. And this is the same thing with these rituals. So like, if you go to a Sabah ritual, the energy is amazing. Like I was at one like last week, and the people are just like out of their minds, and you feel the energy and you're participating in it. But yeah, it's not individualized, and it doesn't work for more than a few hundred people. Okay.